Greetings, everyone. We are being recorded. I'm Kathryn Sikkink. I'm the Ryan Family Professor here at the Carr Center and the Harvard Kennedy School. And it is my great pleasure today to be able to engage in this conversation with Camilo Umaña. I'm going to give a brief introduction. And then we have a series of questions that we will take on. But first, Camilo and I are colleagues and friends, so I'm going to call him Camilo. He's going to call me Kathryn. It'll be informal. I won't call him Dr. Umaña. He is a lawyer and a human rights expert from Colombia. He has a PhD in criminology from the University of Ottawa and a PhD in sociology of law from the University of the Basque Country in Spain. And most recently, he served as Colombia's Deputy Minister of Justice. And he's really just stepped down from that position to come here to the Carr Center, the Kennedy School. During that time, he worked with developing public policies in the penitentiary system, drugs, and transitional justice. He also worked with the Colombian Truth Commission and was helped with leading research on access to justice and impunity for the final report. He's also assisted the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights on transitional justice, and he contributed to the peace agreement, the 2016 peace agreement with the FARC guerrillas. He's been a constitutional law professor for over 7 years and co-directed the Human Rights Master's Program at the Externado University of Colombia. Now, we have agreed, this is an hour-long program, and so we've agreed we're going to try to make sure we go about 40 minutes and have time for your questions, so you should be ready to jump up with questions. We'll be passing around the mic, but as a result, we're going to try to, some of the answers may seem short, but we hope that if there's something you want Camilo to address more, he can elaborate in response to your questions. So let's get started. So Camilo, I just read the formal bio, but you actually have a much more interesting biography than just what I read. And I wonder if you would just tell us a bit more about your background, how you got interested in human rights, and went on to serve in such an important position in Colombia.
Hello, yeah. Hello, everyone. Hello to the Carr Center. Thank you so much for this invitation. I feel very honored to share with you some thoughts. So I think my professional and personal journey has been shaped by my family's history, but also my personal interest in human rights and fight for justice. So in 1998, my father, who was a prominent human rights defender, was killed. He was killed by military intelligence agents. My father had a lot of information on the involvement of the military in different human rights violations. My father had his office where in the same place we lived at. So it was my mom, my father, and I who all day long we were sharing with a lot of victims, a lot of events of the national life, which was full of human rights violations and other grave events of our context. And when he was killed, my mom and I went into exile. We spent around a year into exile, but after that, we decided to go back to Colombia. I decided to join the law school, and my family was very worried because I could take the same or suffer the same destiny as my father. So I didn't get into trouble. I got into a public office. I started working with administrative and public law, nothing having to do with human rights. But one day I started studying a little on human rights, and I did a graduate diploma on human rights and international humanitarian law, which I liked a lot. and I was very bored at my job. And studying this, it was very exciting to me. And one day when I went back to my job, there was one person that told me, "Hey, your father was here, and your father said don't to not to disappear on him, and that he's going to take him with you next week." So I understood directly the threat, and I went abroad again, and I started thinking what to do. To me, I had like a dilemma in front of me. So I could disappear, like stay out of this story, or I could go back and fight against something that I didn't really knew what it was. So I decided to do the later. I went back to Colombia. I started working with different human rights initiatives. I work at the UN level. I work at the inter-American level, litigating different human rights violations. I work with different victims. I went to different parts of the country. I started studying also sociology of law because I wanted to understand better the framework of violence in my country and also in our continent. And I also did my PhD and so on, what you read. And on that time, I end up involved in somehow in the peace agreement negotiations with the guerrilla. They called us a group of victims to go to La Habana, and you know the rest of the story.
No, so that's exactly the next question I want to ask you. But before I do that, I just want to go back to this moment because so this is someone who you think who was associated maybe with intelligence services, who just met you in your work and issued that chilling death threat to you face to face.
At the time, I wasn't working on anything, so I was asking myself, why me? I really don't care in this story. Afterwards, when I started reading some of the books that the paramilitary groups started to publish and other people around them, they mentioned frequently that they needed to cut also the next generation of possible defenders, of possible people that were going to go against them. So maybe it was because of that. Maybe it was because I was also trying to search for the truth in my case, in my father's case history. And just the 2 weeks ago, a former intelligence agent was part of the procedure in Colombia, a criminal law procedure, where he mentioned like all the planning that they did for killing my father and threatening us.
Okay, so you're getting me off topic. So this was in the Jurisdicción Especial de la Paz, the HIP.
He's also participating there.
And we might explain that Colombia has a special jurisdiction for peace, a special court to handle these prosecutions. Was it in the context of that special court?
No, he's participating on that as well, but he mentioned that during the criminal procedures in the ordinary system in Colombia.
Okay, so let's now go back in time. I mean, to some of your most important work, which started with your involvement with the peace agreement negotiations that were happening in Havana, Cuba. There were 4 years of negotiations. And one of the really unique things about these peace negotiations is that the victims were involved. They came to Havana and they gave testimony. So I just wonder if you could just tell us, how did that happen? What was your role in it? And what was the impact of victim testimony?
So at the time I was studying my PhD in criminology in Ottawa, in Canada, and the peace talks were advancing, and they mentioned that they wanted to do some national events having to do with like conferences with victims that they could join together and get some sort of a document or claims, mutual claims for the negotiation table. When this happened, I was invited for the national event. I went there. We had different meetings. And after that, they selected the National University of Colombia, and also the Catholic Church selected a group of groups of 10 people that were allowed to go to Habana and speak directly to the negotiators. It wasn't an active role in the sense that we were not negotiating, of course, but we were participating in front of these people, trying to tell them, persuade them in order to arrive to a good conclusion with the agreement. So I was part of the third delegation of victims. I was invited before, but the security situation was not good, so I declined. And after that, I said to myself, I'm going to take the risk. After some time, one of the mothers, there's one mother who is victim and who joined me in the delegation. She said, Camilo, I feel so disappointed. And I say, why? And she said, because they used us. And I said, of course they used us. You didn't knew they were using us. She said, no, I didn't knew that. I said, yes, they were using us, but they were using us for the first time for the sake of agreeing something in terms of peace, not in terms of war. So how could we not answer to that call? So we could say that they used us, and at the end, an agreement was reached. Not only because we got there, but because of other different circumstances. But we contributed somehow into the process.
So just to keep on that theme, this peace process was one that eventually led to justice, to transitional justice of different types, right? There were reparations programs, there was a missing persons bureau, there were trials, and then there was a truth commission, right? And so I'm just wondering what impact the victim testimony during the negotiations had on the later choice to really incorporate justice directly in the peace agreement.
I am not sure what was the exact impact, but it is true that if you read the documents that we gave to delegations, we wanted a truth commission. We claim for a solution also for the people who were disappeared. We have over 100,000 people disappeared in the armed conflict in Colombia, but also we needed some sort of justice. At the time, I was working with the subject of impunity for my PhD thesis. And I was aware that I didn't want to think of a punitivist kind of framework, that we needed something different. And I started working with other ideas around justice. And my speech in La Habana was about doing a different form of justice, but doing it in the sense that people need to be restored, and we needed to avoid new violence. So at the end, there was this design on 3 different institutions and other measures, transitional justice measures. And when I got back from my PhD in Canada, I started working with the Human Rights Office of the United Nations in Colombia, and we started with the first design of the unit for the search of disappeared people. I was part of that first design. That unit started working, and after more or less 2 years of having worked there was the Truth Commission that got there, and the Human Rights Office started working with the Truth Commission, helping the commissioners to start the first also design of the Truth Commission. And I was part of those trips with all of the commissioners. And at some point they said, Camilo, why don't you join us? Come and do some research with us. And I started working with the Truth Commission at that time.
So can you tell us a little more about your work with the Truth Commission? The Truth Commission has now published its large and impressive report on a really wide variety of issues. So can you just sort of what's it like to be a member of a Truth Commission, and what's what was the kind of the day-to-day work that you all were doing to produce this impressive report?
So, two anecdotes. The first anecdote is, so my grandfather wrote a book in Colombia with other two thinkers, Camilo Torres and Orlando Fazborda, who is very well known, and that gave the name to a sort of time in the history of Colombia that is called La Violencia, Colombia's violence. And in that book, they access the archives of a former, you could say, some sort of a truth commission that was enacted after the Frente Nacional, the National Front in Colombia. That they had some archives, and they started writing and organizing these documents. When they did so, my grandfather said, I want to write, after some time, a chapter on impunity and access to justice. So he wrote on that book a chapter on impunity and access to justice. After 30, 40 years, when the Truth Commission called me and I met the first time with two commissioners, they said, Camilo, we want you to write something for the final report. And I said, what subject? What would you like me to write on? They said, well, all that about human rights violations, but especially on access to justice, because it's what is your PhD on. I was stricken by this fact that over like 3 generations of the same family, and we're still trying to think about that issue and trying to do something about it. So the second anecdote, I got my first day at the Truth Commission. There were like something like 70 people, 80 people maybe, or maybe less. And we sat down in a room. There were 5 of us. And they said, there was a leading researcher for the team. And he said, okay, you 5 are going to write the final report. And I started looking around, and it was doors like this with glass. I said, but how about the other people? What are they going to do? It's just 5 of us to write a final report. And they said, well, the other people are going to do what truth commissions have also need to do. So I said, but the most important thing is the final report. And other commissioners thought there were other really important things that the Truth Commission should do. But we started like designing this very big research on 50 years of armed conflict, 9 million victims, more than 10 different actors, different violations, and so on. And at the end, we were able to produce some documents. In my case, I quit the Truth Commission a year before it ended, and I ended up just writing the part on access to justice that is part of the recommendations and the final findings of the report, and an annex also to the Truth Commission report.
So what do you can you tell, even though I know you worked on the Truth Commission and not as much with the reparations program or the special court, could you just say a few words about other parts of transitional justice that resulted from the peace process?
So the peace process is part of many peace processes that have taken place in Colombia. Many peace processes that have resulted into new forms of violence sometimes, or sometimes into good forms of coexistence and peace. The disarmament of certain groups or the rearmament of others. So if you understand like the transitional justice system as a contemporary sort of idea of organizing exceptional measures confronting the past of violence, that has happened many times in the Republican history of Colombia. many amnesty laws, somehow special tribunals, special procedures, other times these forms of inquiry commissions and truth commission, but it had never happened that we had such a comprehensive system in place. So now we have like the institutions that are in place for the paramilitary problem, let's say, and other institutions that are in place for dealing with the violence derived from the armed conflict with the guerrilla, between the government and the guerrilla. And there you have a special tribunal for peace that is implementing also what they call restorative sanctions, which is also a big question on what is going to be exactly the content of those sanctions and how does it look for gross human rights violations to have restorative measures taken. And you have also the unit for the search of those people disappeared that is extrajudicial, so it doesn't prosecute people, it takes information to find people who are disappeared, to find the bodies. And also you have these other programs that come before those institutions that are the reparation scheme that you and Doug helped to evaluate, and other schemes of reparations. Colombia has a very sophisticated also ordinary justice system. So there is the constitutional court that has many rulings and many procedures, but also other courts. So there are a lot of different procedures. What we found at the Truth Commission report when I was doing this part about access to justice is that despite Colombia has enacted so many laws, has taken so many steps to create new tribunals and so on, people, especially victims, feel that there is a huge and rampant impunity and there is no answer to what happened to them. So it is not only an assessment on the institutional structure, but also about what those institutions can or how can they move forward, a peaceful context, how can they move forward, more reparation for victims, and of course a better coexistence.
Now, of all these transitional justice mechanisms, perhaps the most innovative is this idea of a special tribunal with what we would call alternative sentencing. You're calling it restorative justice, which is also it's a type of restorative justice, but maybe the lingo here would be alternative sentencing. So can you just tell us a little more about the alternative sentencing? No one will go to prison from this court, but they will have alternative types of sentences.
So this tribunal was created for the people who are most responsible for the crimes, which means that there is a huge amount of people who are not the most responsible that will get the wider amnesty possible or other forms of not getting into prison or into procedures, as happens also with the military. So the tribunal can prosecute not only guerrilla members, but also members of the armed forces, and also third parties, which was called like corporations and other kind of private agents. Unfortunately, the Constitutional Court said that the Special Tribunal for Peace, the jurisdiction over those third parties wasn't mandatory. So it was on their, if they were willing to go there, they could go to the special tribunal. So we are lacking a big deal of the problem, which is how the economic system, but also civil parties took part on the Colombian armed conflict. So the Special Tribunal for Peace prosecutes those people and can give different forms of sentencing. For those people that confess, that tell the truth, that help looking for people disappeared, that help repairing somehow the victims, they can give them restorative sanctions, which means sanctions that look like work or different kind of forms of symbolic reparation to victims. Right now, there are 5 main projects around, for instance, reforestation, around mining, taking off the mines, around memory, creating memory strategies, and so on. And other group of people who don't confess, don't accept what they did, but later on accept part of the truth, they get some alternative retributive sanctions. So less number of years, let's say, of imprisonment. And then there are others that do not confess, that do not tell the truth. Those people go through a classic, ordinary, let's say, process with an ordinary kind of sentencing. So those are like the three possible sanctions that these people can meet. But in the middle, the Tribunal for Peace has employed a lot of creativity, trying to think of and design other kinds of measures. So precautionary measures, trying to protect, for instance, mass graves placements. They have also taken steps to do these restorative conferences, trying to bring more exchange between perpetrators and victims. Some people have even issued some sort of pardon to those people that were involved. There is a form of dialogical, let's say, they call it justice, where all of the actors of the conflict try to get into the common truth, let's say, of what happened. So it's a really complex setting for a really complex conflict.
Just from a position of someone who studies transitional justice, I have to say that it's fascinating. It's so ambitious, incredibly ambitious, and incredibly, as you said, creative strategy that you're adopting. Now, so you've stepped onto the Truth Commission. All this time you've been an academic as well, so you've been teaching classes. So what was the process through which you then enter into government as the the deputy minister of justice?
So this has a lot to do also with transitional justice, because there is now a left-wing government, and a former guerrilla member who was elected as president, Gustavo Petro, and he started appointing his ministers. When he did so, he appointed as Minister of Justice Mr. Osuna, which was rather liberal minister, not very much left-wing, at least at the first sight. And Minister Osuna was also my university professor. When I was freshman, he was my professor. He didn't remember me. I was a good student, but there were hundreds of students, so it wasn't because of that. I was also a professor at the University Externado, and when he was appointed, he was also a professor. I sent a message, as any other professor sent him, saying, congratulations, it's a great nomination. We hope justice is better in this country, so on and so on. And I sent him also the document of the Truth Commission, the report, saying, listen, if you want to do something about this, implement something that we did find at the Truth Commission, this is the time. You can do it. So after a week, he called me and he says, listen, I would like you on my team. I said, of course. How can I contribute to? And he said, well, you can be one of my staff members, but I need to tell the president that I need to present 3 people for the position of deputy minister. You are not going to get it, but I want you to be there. So I said, of course, you can use my name, no worries. So after a week, I was with my wife, Diana, we were having dinner, and I got a message on my phone saying, "Hello, Deputy Minister, I wait for you tomorrow at brunch." So I asked Diana, "What do you think this message means?" She said, "You got the position." I was like, "No, it's not possible. It couldn't happen like that." So I at the day after I went at his office, and yeah, I was the Prime Minister of Justice, which was to me incredible because I almost died so many times in my country. I was trying to struggle for the justice in my father's case. I was part of this Truth Commission and then the United Nations and all these struggles for peace and for justice and so on. And I didn't knew that all these different happenings would take me to the Ministry of Justice. So when I was there, I asked the Prime Minister because there were two deputy ministers at the Ministry of Justice, and I asked which one of those. And he said the one on criminal policy and restorative justice. I started looking after in the internet what does it has, and it had a lot of things: the drug policy, the transitional justice, and the criminal policy and the penitentiary system. And when I saw that, I said, "Oh no, what did I get into?" And well, but I started working with him, and I lasted like 2 years and a half, and now I'm here with you.
So many of our students, and I look around the room and I know, do aspire to public policy work at the highest levels. Okay. Can you share some, tell us a little more about your work and maybe also any advice you have for students who hope to go on and work in government? Right. I mean, in the human rights world, I think there's always this worry, right, that if you go to work with a government, you may need to compromise your values or your principles. And so, how did you handle that issue?
So you remember that when I told you that when I got to the law school, my family was very worried that I was going to follow my father's destiny. And for some time, one of my main questions was about destiny. But at some point, with all this happening to me, I realized that the big question for me was rather the mission, the purpose. It wasn't the destiny. Destiny you don't control or you don't know, but the mission is something that you can do something about. So I try to do a lot about taking my life on my own, trying to also earn the gift of life, let's say, and trying to do something about my mission, not worrying too much about my destiny. Maybe sometimes I should worry more, but it is true that when you go into government, you need to get into those positions without anyone controlling your destiny. And you can join different missions, different purposes, and you can do something collective, something really interesting. You have the power, it's interesting. But if you get into that world with someone controlling your destiny, you are not anymore owner, you don't own yourself anymore. So when you get into those positions, people start asking for jobs, for other kind of favors and so on. If you don't own yourself, you cannot decide. People decide for you. So you end up doing not so good things. So I was free. I wasn't supposed to be there. So I did what my ethics told me. And that's how I got into there, and that's how I got out of there. So there is a big issue on those positions. It's really difficult to get into those positions. but it's even more difficult to get out of those positions. So, and it is true that you don't own the position. The position is for the public. So if you get there and you think of the public as a private property, you are mistaken. It is not yours. It is part of a wider society. So I think that if you get there, if you want to do a change, you need to own yourself, but also you need to follow your ethics. And that is built way before the position. So my grandfather used to tell me that the ethics are, so the morals are like the flags on a ship, on a boat. But the ethic is the, how do you say mastil?
Mast.
The mast, but the ethics is the mast. There you can hang different flags, sometimes of one color or the other. You can hang different flags, but you need a mask. And that's something that you need to navigate life. And once you're alive, there is a very nice fado, the Portuguese music, that says that uh, living is not necessary. What is necessary is to navigate. So, viver no es preciso, navegar es preciso. And that means that once you're alive, you have no option. You need to navigate. But you need a good mast and you need nice flags to do it right.
So that's a wonderful description for us to keep with us. Now, just how did we get so lucky at the Carr Center to be able to have you come here, including your voluntary resignation from a government that didn't want you to leave? Okay, so how hard was that?
Well, this position usually is not, it was a really hard position. So usually a year or a year and a half was enough for other also predecessors. And in my case, I had been there for almost 2 years and a half. So it was a lot. And it was a lot to take also from my personal and my family side. I had never been trained to have people following me, have big trucks or security all the time. I'm not used to that and I don't like that. So it wasn't part of my life. I never got confused thinking that that was my life. And my amazing wife saved me from that. And she got a scholarship here at Harvard, at the Nieman Foundation. And she's an amazing journalist. And when she earned it, I asked myself, well, I was in front again of a dilemma: my family or my job. This time it was a very easy dilemma. And here I am. I loved what I did at the Ministry of Justice. I loved every day of it. It was amazing. It was an incredible experience. And it was over. And now I'm here.
So we promised to open it up to people and at this time, and so we will. But I just want to say that when we are at the Carr Center are very grateful that you came here to Harvard, and we know that you are having time with your family, but you're also our terrific fellow here at the Carr Center. And so I want the people in the audience to know that Camilo will be here for the whole year. And he has already been a resource person for us, and he will continue to do his own research, to do his own writing, but also I think he's willing to be a resource person for people here at the university who would like to know more, especially about Colombia, but also about transitional justice and also about the dilemmas that human rights people face when they work in public policy. So just having said that, let's open it up. Emma's going to take around the
Hi.
Identify yourself.
Yes, I'm Lina Shawaf. I'm Syrian journalist, name and follow with Diana. So it's very critical for me. I don't know a lot about Colombia. I know from media and from you, but sometimes there is something you don't know if you don't dig in it, you know? So sometimes when you have this transition justice with the government, they ask people like you to be, as a minister, to bring some credibility to their authority or something like this, because as Professor Sikkink said, that it doesn't go human right with government. Normally, this is what's in the world, as in Syria. They tried to do it many times with Assad regime, but it worked with some people, but it didn't work with some people. So I really interesting to hear, were you able to really do everything that you believe in it? Like the change and everything?
Of course, I couldn't do everything that I wanted to. There are a lot of constraints in the public arena, but um, I I didn't do anything that I didn't want it to do, and I was able to do some things that I could never had dream of doing, and I could never have done without the public office. So, for instance, we handled 126 different prisons in Colombia, prison system, yeah, jails, and we created 3 public libraries in the prison system. We created a brand of coffee that is produced in the prison system. We are in the middle of creating also over 100 different bakeries for elaborating the products also for the inmates and for the outside. We created a new alternative to prison for women who were incarcerated, being marginalized, and over 100 women are already out of prison trying to do social work instead. So these kind of things you cannot do from the outside. You need to go into the public policy. You can do it in 2 ways. You can be out of the government and try to push for those public policies, but sometimes you can also do it from the inside. And if you take the chance, if you take the opportunity, and if you do it as you mean it, you can make a change. The objective of the human rights defense, I think, is not going against governments, but is going in favor of human rights. So if you can do it from the inside, take the chance. If you do it from the outside, you also take the chance. Never lose a chance to advance on human rights is what my idea.
So, Emma, this is the one here in the front row. Actually, the second row, excuse me, the second row. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Tyagi. I'm at the law school. I'm with the Human Rights Program, and I usually work at Amnesty International at the Sri Lanka researcher, but I'm here researching on truth commissions, taking a sabbatical with the Human Rights Program. So my question is around the fact that, how did your relationship with, I mean, you yourself is a victim yourself because of what you've gone through, but how did your relationship with the rest of the victim community evolve or transition as you became a part of government? Given that, I mean, from what we hear from the families that disappeared back in Sri Lanka, is that there's been just so many processes, one after the other, that there's a lot of, fatigue with domestic processes, that people have now started looking to the international community to look at like international justice. And in this whole process, I mean, you were in the role for 1.5 or 2.5 years. How did it change, shift? Was there a shift? How's your relationship now? Did they treat you as a sellout of some sort? Or do you still have a constructive role that you've played that they, appreciate you for sort of leaving that and transitioning into a government role?
It's a very good question. No, I feel like there is a sort of acknowledgement, and people were rather happy that certain persons were part of the government because they knew that we could make something different out of it. And we started to work closely in different initiatives. For instance, with the enforced disappeared persons. So the unit for the search of the disappeared had a lot of trouble to try to coordinate the different agencies of the state. It had no coordinating power. So we created a system, and it was the victims who told us in confidence, saying, listen, we need something else. We need this to be more strong. And we started working together to get that done. So, of course, when you think about a Ministry of Justice in the middle of such a context full of impunity, sometimes you get those claims of people saying, listen, where is my justice, right? Because it depends also on very different institutions. So I think that just being part of also of that suffering gives you also the stand to try to look for some solutions, some answers, and try to work together. I never had like a discussion like you imagine. I had all my time. I was focused on working together with the people, and people felt that it was their initiative, that I was a tool for them to put that into the public arena, and that was my objective also. I was a tool. I wasn't myself. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Jose Miguel, MPP1 from Colombia. So thank you very much for being here. Building up on what you were saying, I find very interesting like the discussion in Colombia about like the alternative sentences, because there has been a discussion that sadly hasn't been over in the last 8 years about if alternative sentences are really justice. So I wanted to ask your perception about this, and what would you define justice as after working in the minister? And maybe one like pop-up question, if I can have it, is what would have you done differently looking backwards?
Well, about the sanctioning, if alternative sanctioning means it's adequate to what happened. So one of the first ideas, or the first need, when you need to answer those kind of questions, sometimes you say victims need this or victims need that. So there's a huge heterogeneity between victims. So there are not the same needs, not the same claims. So it's not only about what victims think. You also need that transitional justice communicates that everyone is above the law. So you need that to be for sure in place, because impunity is placed as a form of neutralization of transmitting that the law is valid and there are people that are above the law. So you need also these measures to repair or restore somehow what happened. Of course, gross human rights violations, the only way to really repair those violations is that they don't occur at the first instance. There is no other way. So you cannot repair extrajudicial execution, torture, enforced disappearances. You cannot repair that, but you can do something about it. So the system needs to look like it's doing something about it. And also it needs to get to all all of people who are involved somehow, even through a mechanism of truth, through a mechanism of justice, through a mechanism of, you need to get all those responsibilities in place. You need to know what happened. So if alternative sentencing or restorative sanctions can encompass more or less those messages, they have that function. The only way to making someone responsible is not prison time. We have a very crazy system. So people who commit theft, who commit sexual assault, or who commit fraud, all of them are have one same form of responsibility, prison time. And you said, how long is the prison time? How short is the prison time? That's the only discussion. But we need to see responsibility as something more broad, something more comprehensive, and something that can be linked more to the problems, the conflicts that are at the root of what happened. So I think that alternative measures and also restorative measures can transmit, can create that message, can bring that. The issue is that we don't know yet what is going to happen in the transitional justice process in Colombia, because it's not only about what is on the paper in the law, it's about what is going to happen, how judges do it, how do we implement it. So those are other issues. So it's a process, it's a broader process. And if I think I can do something differently, right now, I don't know about my time at the ministry, or something differently. I'm not sure. That's a very good question. I have to think more about that. I'm not sure. I'm sorry.
So we don't have much time left. And so I'm going to just ask, I see two hands up right here in like the third row. So I'm going to take two questions plus June right behind from the Latin American Studies Center. And we're going to take those last three questions and then a brief response, okay?
Hi, I'm Chris. I'm studying public policy here, also student ambassador of Carr Center. I really appreciate this conversation. So my question is that we know the government of Pedro and Marquez, they come to this position like with a very strong stand in peace process, which was absent under the government of Duque. But like 2 years later, like we know many things are going on, and it's like many times like more complex than people expected. So I would like to ask, like, in the second half of their governance, like in your perspective, what should be their priority, like in transitional justice, especially thinking about the potential transition, like between governments, could endanger the achievements now? Yeah, that's my question.
Can you just pass it down the row? Or?
I'm Juan. I'm an SJD at the law school. My question to Camilo is, for most of your life, you have been working on serious human rights violations, both like in practice and academically. But now at the ministry, you work also in other kind of crimes. Like I think that you knew your approach to criminal law expanded. And I wanted to ask you how your perception of criminal law change by approaching other kind of crimes, not only the ones that like human rights activists usually focused on.
Oh,
I have a really quick question.
4 questions.
Sorry. I'm Camila. I'm from Colombia. I'm doing my LLM right now in the Harvard Law School. And I would like to have your thoughts around how the recommendations of the Truth Commission are being implemented right now. Yeah, that would.
Hi, I'm June from the David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies. You brought up the subject of the disappeared, and I was wondering how successful meaning the government, the Justice Department, has been in locating disappeared people, and what the extent of forensic expertise there is in Colombia.
So very different questions. Let me try to answer them. So what should be the priority in terms of transitional justice for this second half of the government? I think implement what has been agreed. So there is a beautiful time on creativity, trying to figure things out and inventing new things. And now it's a very beautiful time on implementing and putting things together. So there are other peace talks and negotiations at the same time happening in Colombia. So it is important to keep those big peace talks and negotiations going on track, but it is important to consolidate what we already have at hand. So it is true that the government has implemented a lot of what was agreed, but it is true that it's also very difficult to implement some things. So I think that the peace agreements, the years after the peace agreements, maybe the 2 or the first year after the peace agreements are the most important ones, because it's when things go definitely wrong or when things can take a good pathway. So we lost those years, and now we need to try to correct how we can implement the peace agreement. So it's also implementing and trying to correcting those wrongs created around the peace agreement. About my perception of the criminal law, if it changed, well, actually, so most of the people that are imprisoned, almost all of them, are because of low crime, street crime. So I guess around 80% of people who are in prison are there because of this low crime. So I think we have to be aware that in situations as Colombia, where you have very grave things going on, the criminal system is not able to prosecute those things. The criminal system perhaps is not even designed to prosecute those things. And perhaps that is also one
those things being what?
those gross human rights violations. Perhaps it is why we also need transitional justice in context as Colombia. And I'm not sure if in other contexts as well. I'm not sure if in the US the criminal system is also designed for that purpose. Who are the people who are imprisoned? Who are the people who are prosecuted? So when we wanted to and this goes back to your question on the perception of the criminal justice, when we wanted to reform the criminal justice in Colombia, what we did is to focus on low crime, not to focus on high crime. Because if we focus on low crime, we would address 80% of the problem in terms of the penitentiaries, in terms of the prison system. And if you have a system that works for low crime, maybe you have good chances to, or good capabilities to focus on other types of crime. About the recommendations, how they are being implemented. So at the Ministry of Justice, as a deputy minister, one of the main units of my unit was the transitional justice unit, and we needed to implement those measures. And when we found, we started working with the Truth Commission recommendations. So I suffered the Truth Commission recommendations that I was part of, because it is very difficult to implement some of those recommendations. When you are on the other side of the table, when you start writing down recommendations, I didn't write the recommendations on justice, I have to say that. But when you start writing those recommendations, you start thinking on the future, on what can be achieved, on perhaps even your ambition or your dream, your aspiration as a society. But sometimes if you are on the other side of the table, you know that that cannot properly be implemented, that's just a dream. So I think that the function of a truth commission is not to create, let's say, a governmental plan, even if that can be one of the functions, but it's basically trying to tell the society what has been a lie, what is truth, and what has been denied. Maybe if you open the space for truth, lessen the space for lies and for denial, you get a very strong result of the Truth Commission. And the recommendations you need to work on, of course. But we were discussing that with your group, Kathryn, the other day, that there is work to be done in terms of exchange with scholars that are trying to implement and design truth commissions in the world. So how do you write down a recommendation? That's something that needs to be addressed, and I hope we can address it together, Kathryn. And about the disappeared people, how effective has it been? So let's say the technology of disappearing people in Colombia, over 100,000 people, was by far more effective than trying to find those people. People were thrown in rivers, people were given to, or bodies were given to animals, people were put into mass graves in jungles. So it is really, it is effective in the sense that it really brought a reality in Colombia where you have, like, rivers are practically, some of rivers are mass grave sites. So it's really bad. So the effectiveness of finding those bodies is not as high as it should be, maybe. Forensic capabilities in Colombia are very good. I believe Argentina, Guatemala, and Colombia are the places where you have the best forensic abilities. But you need a lot of technology. You need the human resources, which is anthropology, but also forensics, but you need the labs, and the labs are very expensive. And we lack of the best technology. Maybe that could be a contribution from projects around Harvard or these kind of institutions. This could be something that really could contribute on. You have amazing labs, you have amazing people. Maybe this could be some form of contribution to that problem that makes a lot of people suffer, not only in Colombia, but elsewhere.
So I just really want to thank Camilo Umaña for a terrific session. I want to thank you for being our fellow at the Carr Center and for the contributions that you make to our institution and that you have made in your life to Colombia. So with that, I know that you will stay and answer some remaining questions if people didn't get their question answered. And I want to thank you very much.